Our gospel lesson this morning comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. And when the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you to do." Now standing there were 6 stone jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each one holding 20 or 30 gallons. And Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And Jesus said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water, and it had become wine, and he didn't know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk, but you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So here we have Jesus turning water into wine. This is his first miracle, probably one of his more famous miracles. A pretty unfortunate timing for this miracle in the lectionary, given people are trying to do dry January right now. But it's important to note that John, the guy who wrote this passage, doesn't refer to this as a miracle. In fact, John never refers to any of Jesus' miracles as miracles. Instead, John refers to them as signs. And it may sound like I'm splitting hairs here, but I think that there's a big difference between a miracle and a sign. There's not necessarily any meaning to a miracle. It's just supposed to be appreciated on its own merit. It's supposed to be marveled at. But what does a sign do? A sign actually points to something beyond it. A sign points to something else. So think of it this way. When you pull up to an intersection and you see a red octagon, what does that mean? Yeah, it means tap your brakes and keep going, right? No, it means stop. And isn't it amazing that pretty much everybody knows this? I mean, it's an incredible feat of engineering and communication that has gone into making this a pretty universally recognized symbol. And then you add to this the fact that there are these big white letters and a very specific kind of reflective red that there was probably a series of meetings to decide on, and then you have the varying sizes depending on where it's going to be on the road and what the speed limit is on that particular road. A lot went into the creation of a stop sign as we know it, and so I would say a stop sign is pretty miraculous. But stop signs aren't meant to be appreciated. They aren't. You're not supposed to get out of the car and stare at them and marvel at what a feat of engineering it is. If you do that, you're going to have a long line of people behind you who are very upset. What are you supposed to do at a stop sign? Stop. The sign itself, remarkable as it is, isn't important. What's important is what the sign is pointing to, what it means, what it's trying to communicate. And if we ignore that to our own peril. So John is doing something really cool here. By using this word sign, John is trying to get us to ask the question, okay, cool, water into wine, love it, but what does it point to? What does it mean? What's it trying to tell us? Because those are the sorts of questions that we ask when we're faced with a sign rather than a miracle. So, what exactly is this sign pointing to? Well, before we get to that, let's talk about what exactly happened here. First of all, this passage takes place at a wedding. I've never been to a first century Jewish wedding, obviously, but as best I can tell from what I've read, these things were ragers. I mean, everybody from the community was there. There was food. There was good food. There was wine, music, dancing, and these parties usually lasted for days. And so to run out of wine at one of these parties, not only would it have been a catastrophe, but it would have been a major embarrassment for the hosts in front of their entire town. So Jesus tells the stewards to fill 6 stone jars with water. A couple of things about these stone jars. First, apparently we're told that these were used for religious purification ceremonies, which is a fascinating detail that you better believe we're going to come back to. But we're also told that these stone jars held 20 to 30 gallons each. Which means that when Jesus turned water into wine, he didn't just grab a cup of water and say, ta-da, and it became wine. We're talking conservative estimate here, 120 gallons of wine. But wait, there's more. Because in ancient Rome, they used to water down their wine. 4 parts water to 1 part wine, apparently, if you wanted to get really crazy, because some other estimates that I read have 6 parts water to 1 part wine. So really, Jesus made about 600 gallons of drinkable wine, which comes out to about 3,000 bottles of wine as we know them, which even if you're getting the cheap stuff at Trader Joe's, that's going to run you about $10,000. But apparently the wine steward tasted the wine. He was impressed by the quality, especially since it was so late in the party and everyone was already pretty drunk and didn't know the difference between a $50 bottle and $2 Chuck. So how much wine, how much good wine did Jesus actually make here? Apparently enough for one person to have a glass a day for the next 41 years. So, a lot. Jesus made a lot of wine. Now, one last thing. At the end of this passage, we're told that Jesus did all of this to reveal his glory. The word glory is an interesting one. It literally means something like weight. That's W-E-I-G-H-T, weight. So it can also be translated as importance. So this sign in particular is asking the question, what's so important about Jesus' ministry? What's it all about? What makes it substantial? What gives it its weight? So think of it this way. I was listening to an interview a couple weeks ago, and the guy conducting the interview asked the interviewee, if you had to have one thing written on your forehead for everyone to see, and for you to see in the mirror every single day, what would it be? In other words, what's your main core message that you want to share with everyone you encounter? What's the important thing? What's the weighty thing? He's really asking about glory there. Apparently, this sign is answering that question for Jesus. What's Jesus all about? What's the main message that Jesus wants everyone to know from the get-go? What gives Jesus' message its weight? What's so glorifying about it? So let's take all of these details and see what exactly this sign that reveals Jesus' glory is pointing to. What gives the message of Jesus its weight? What's its core? What's the crucial thing that Jesus wants people to know about him from the word go? Well, first of all, Jesus chose a party as his inaugural sign. A party. And by party, I don't mean a dinner party with a bunch of exclusive, wealthy, staunch guests where everything is formal, and if you use the wrong spoon on the wrong course, somebody's going to pass out. This was a red Solo cup kind of party, if you know what I mean. It's a buoyant, loud, fun party that the entire town was invited to. And just as the entire thing was about to go off the rails because the wine ran out, Jesus chose to keep the party going as his glorifying sign. Second of all, Jesus chose wine, and a lot of it, and it was the good stuff. When we look at the world around us, one outlook that we can have is there isn't enough. We can look at the world around us and say there just isn't enough. There isn't enough time. There isn't enough money. There's only a finite amount of clout or attention that I can get from people. But then in comes Jesus with his 3,000 bottles of wine as though to say, no, there's enough. There's enough. There's enough room at the table for the riffraff. There's enough wine to keep the party going. There is plenty to go around. And so look, you can take a look at the world around you like it's some kind of pie, and you need to get the biggest slice because there's only so much to go around and everybody's out to get theirs. Or you can look at all of that desperate grasping as some kind of strange attempt at trying to divide infinity. Third, let's remember that this sign spared the family hosting the wedding an incredible amount of shame in a culture that took shame very seriously. One of the effects of this sign was saving people from massive public humiliation. And finally, like I said before, I find it really interesting that Jesus makes a ton of wine for a party, and he does it using the stone jars that are normally used for religious purification purposes. Can you imagine how offensive that might have been to some people who are at the party? But it's like Jesus came in and said, look, I'm not trying to give you a bunch of new religious rules. I'm here because there's a party happening, and I want to keep this party going for as long as possible. So, what's the one thing that gives Jesus' message its weight? What's the first sign pointing to? If Jesus had to have something written on his forehead to tell the world what he was all about, what would it be? Well, given what Jesus does in this passage, I think it would be something along the lines of, there's enough for everyone. There's enough for everyone, so let's keep the party going. Let's take these stone jars that we used to use to delineate who's in and who's out and who's pure and who's impure and who has the right to be here and doesn't have the right to be here, and let's just fill them with a bunch of really good wine and have some fun. Let's take the people that the world wants to shame, and let's invite them to the party too. Let's stop looking at the world like there's only so much to go around. I mean, not in a reckless or irresponsible way, but in a way that frees us from thinking that everyone around us is our competition when really they're just fellow partiers that are drinking from the same bottomless jug that we are. And finally, let's stop thinking that following Jesus looks like walking around with a clipboard and a guest list, trying to make sure that everybody at the party deserves to be there and that they're following the proper protocol to stay. Let's put down the clipboard, grab a drink, and get to know somebody that we wouldn't normally have the opportunity to get to know. That's a whole lot to be written on one forehead. So I guess it's a good thing Jesus used the water and wine thing. Thanks be to God. Amen.